Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf Kafchet. We are at the um, um, we are at the bottom of Kaf Zion Amabet. I had the bookmark in the wrong place, and so we're at the bottom of Kaf Zion Amabet, and we are talking about the ability of people to take the law into their own hands. One can understand why we might want this. Now, of course, let's be clear what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. When we say that you could take the law into your own hands, I don't think that we're saying that that this means that you can, if you,
vigilante.
yeah, I don't think that we're talking about vigilantism. Really, what we're talking about is in monetary matters where you have an opportunity to do something, to take back something that belongs to you. You may have the opportunity, you may be allowed to do it. Now, we're going to see some qualifications of this, as we'll see in a moment. Yes, I remember him, and that is not the kind of vigilantism that we're talking about. Where that would be vigilantism, and that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, I know, it was a long time ago, but in 1980, early 1980s, I think. In any event, let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen, and yeah, too many years ago to remember. I don't know about that. You've got a pretty good memory, Mark. So, okay, so we are in the middle of this discussion, and we noted that everyone agrees that you are allowed to take the law into your own hands if you're going to end up suffering a loss as a result. So, for example, let's say let's say the computer that I'm working on right now actually belongs to Stan, and Stan needs it. And if he doesn't have the computer, he's going to be losing business. He's not going to be able to do his business as well. And so as a result, in that situation, if Stan happens to see it and I'm not holding it, or, etc., he can just take it and say, hey, that's my computer. I want it back. This belongs to me. I'm going to take it. On the other hand, and everybody agrees in that situation. On the other hand, if Stan doesn't need it, or if my holding it will result in Stan being able to collect the damages associated with the loss associated with it. So, for example, now let's say that my animal is about to gore, which is or about to, it's in my animal is in Stan's yard, and it's about to step on his beautiful roses. Now, those roses are beautiful, but they have a value, and Stan knows that if my animal stomps on his roses, I'm going to have to pay the full value of those roses. And so as a result, in that situation, there's going to be a debate as to whether or not Stan is able to take the law into his own hands. Rav Yehuda says that the person may not. Oh, yes, absolutely. Rav Yehuda says that you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands because you could just go to a judge. The judge will find the right decision and you'll get paid. So don't worry about it. And Rav Nachman says, no, you may take the law into your hands because you're acting with the law. You're consistent. You're doing the right thing, and you shouldn't have to go through the pain of having to go to court in order to prove your case. So that's the background. That's the machlokas that we've got, and now we're going to pick up with the fourth line from the bottom of Kaf Zion Amabet, and we're going to try 8 times to prove: do we hold like Rav Yehuda or do we hold like Rav Nachman? Now, warning, all 8 times are going to fail. We are not going to successfully prove whether we hold like either one, but according to the halacha, according to the way it's recorded in Shulchan Aruch, we do in fact hold like Rav Nachman. Now, that is again not suggesting that we advocate for vigilantism. That is not what we're saying, but the halacha does support the ability of somebody to take action especially to avoid loss, but also to take action so that they don't have to go to court in order to make their claim and to address their loss. Okay, so let's try number one.
There's a note from Steinsaltz that the Ramah says that, quotes, citing the Torah, that that's only the case if there's no other way to get the property back.
Excellent point. So the point is that, and we will see a little bit of that as we go. That you're actually, of course they got that from the Gemara, and so let's focus on, let's see how we see that in the Gemara as we go through this. So Masav Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana asked the following question. Look, Rav Yehuda, this doesn't seem to be consistent with your viewpoint, because look, Ben Bagbag Omer, what did Ben Bagbag say? Al tikanes lechatzer chavercha litol es shelcha shelo bershus. You're not allowed to go into the yard of your neighbor without permission, even though you're getting your own thing. So because shemete ra'el lav kaganav, because people might see you as a thief. Ela shavor shinav, but rather you can just break his teeth. The amorlo, and then you tell him shali ani notel, I'm going to take my own thing. Meaning you can't do it in a deceptive manner, because if you do it in a deceptive manner, then you're going to look like a thief. And so instead, be upfront about it, take your action, and you'll be okay. But the bottom line is, it says that you can take the action, and so it seems like you can act as your own judge and jury. So Amar Le, Rav Yehuda said, no, imach. So Rashi offers two different interpretations of this word imach. If we take a look at Rashi, first Rashi at the top of the page, and it says, Bidmia, this is a question. Kolomar, hogenet? You think that this answer, this ruling, is actually a proper one? Hogenet he? No, that's not. It's not a proper one. So as a result, so that's why. And why isn't it? Let's take a look back in the Gemara, and then we'll go back and read it again with Rashi's second explanation. Because Ben Bagba Yechidahu, Ben Bagba is just an individual. Nobody else agreed with him. Ufligi Rebanan Ale, and the rabbis argued with him, saying that you can't just break the person's teeth. So Lishna Acharina, but now back into Rashi, first the words of the second line of Rashi at the top of Kochet Amud Aleph. Lishna Acharina, imach tehei tshuva zu she'ena klum. Right? You know the answer to this question. So the two ways to understand imach is, this is a question. Imach, you think that this is such a great thing? You think that this is so wonderful? Or imach, you know the answer to this. But the bottom line is that that those are the two views of imach in this context, according to Rashi. So Rabbi Yanai Amar, Rabbi Yanai says, my shvor shinav bedin. And Rabbi Yanai offers a second answer. 1 second. When we say that you're supposed to break the guy's teeth, we don't mean that literally. We mean take him to court. 1 second, ihachi, if you're going to tell me that you're supposed to take him to court. The emorlo, why does the Brisa say that you should say to him? Meaning that it seems to indicate that the litigant would say this to the person who's holding the property improperly. But omrim lo mi bai, it should be saying that the court should say, in which case it should be plural. And shaliyan notel, it shouldn't be the person saying, I'm taking my own stuff, but rather shalohu notel mi baile. It should be that he's taking his own stuff. So kasha, in fact, it's a question. Now, of course, this question, you often will use the term kasha when it's a question, but it's not such a great question, because it's not, frankly, it seems to me that one could answer the same way. Then when we say to him, it means say to the court. It means say to him through the court that you want to take your own stuff. And so as a result, it's problematic, but it's not a complete reproof. In any event, the bottom line is that we've tried number one to prove whether we hold like Rabbi Yehuda or Rav Nachman, and we haven't been successful. But we have highlighted a very important principle, and that is a principle that you're not supposed to even appear like a thief. That even appearing like a thief is something that one should avoid. Tashma, Shorsha Allah al Gabi Chaberu Largo. So ox one, we'll call ox one Alan the ox. Alan the ox goes and on top of Bob the bottom ox. Okay, and so now we have one ox on top of the other. Uva bal hatachton, and the owner of Bob the bottom ox, he goes and pulls out shveshama deshalo. He pulls out the bottom ox. Well, when he pulls out the bottom ox, the top ox falls over. V'nafal yon umes, and now Alan, the upper ox, falls and dies. Putter. The bottom ox owner is exempt, even though his action of pulling out his ox resulted in the death. So that it's going to be putter. So now Mila b'muat. Now, what kind of case are we talking about? We must be talking about this action of the upper ox, Alan, to kill Bob the bottom ox is an action that is a part of Karen of using a horn, and so as a result, it's part of the if you've done it 3 times, then you're obligated to pay the full amount. And so let's assume that this is an animal that's done it already. And what we're telling us is that even though the owner of Bob the bottom ox will get paid in full, he's going to get his full money back for the death of Bob the bottom ox, but yet he can take the law into his own hands. So delay kapseda. So even though there's no loss, yet he can take the law into his own hands. So isn't that a proof for a proof for Rav Nachman against Rav Yehuda? No, because we could actually say betam de ikapseda. We could say that we're the Alan, the upper ox, is actually only a tam, and so as a result, the owner of Bob the bottom ox will in fact suffer a loss if the death is allowed to proceed, and it's only because he's going to suffer a loss that he's allowed to take the law into his own hands. Because as we said, if you are going to suffer a loss, you can take the law into your own hands because so as to avoid the loss. Well, 1 second. What about the end of that, Bryce? If you're telling me that the attacking ox was a tam, what about the end? Well, 1 second. If amai chayiv. So the end of the brisa says that if the owner of Bob the bottom ox, instead of pulling out Bob the bottom ox, he pushes off Alan the upper ox, and so now Alan the upper ox now falls and dies. Well, the owner of Bob the bottom ox is going to have to pay, is going to be liable for the death of that animal. But if that's true, and we're talking about a tam where you're allowed to take the law into your own hands, why in fact is it because you're only going to get paid half? Why is the owner of Bob the bottom ox going to be liable for the death of Alan the upper ox? He's just trying to save his own money, right?
It almost contradicts.
Correct. It almost contradicts exactly. So the Gemara answers, and this is where the Ramah gets his point. Shahayalo shamto velo shmato. Right. The point is that we're talking about a situation where the owner of Bob the bottom ox could have pulled out Bob, but instead, by choosing to act affirmatively against Alan the upper ox, he is not acting in the least damaging way, and so as a result, he's caused more damage than he might have otherwise, and therefore he's going to be liable for Alan the upper ox.
To take the law into his own
hands, but
he's still liable.
So, well, he's still no. Well, in that situation, we would most people would argue that that's not allowed. That's effectively saying that you're liable is saying you can't take the law into your own hands.
He's not guilty for taking the law into his own hand, but he still has a fine to pay.
Well, I hear you.
To the strict interpretation.
Yes, I think that what the Gemara is understanding that if in fact one is allowed to take the law into one's own hands, one will not face penalties associated with it.
That sounds reasonable.
Right.
But
so the point is that here what we're saying is you're allowed to take the law into your own hands, but you have to do it in the least damaging way possible. And if you don't do it in the least damaging way possible, then you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands, and you will face liability associated with it. Okay, so that is case number 2, and so I'm going to leave that on the screen as we turn to case number 3, or attempt number 3. So again, attempt number 3 is not a successful proof, because we could say that we're dealing with a situation of loss, and everybody agrees you could take the law into your own hand in the case of loss. So Tashma, If I fill your entire yard, and so your entire front yard with barrels of wine and oil, so now you can't leave your house, and I've effectively imprisoned you, so there's no way you can get out without breaking my stuff. He's allowed to walk in and walk out. And if it turns out that that results in some of the barrels breaking, tough luck on me for having put them all in your yard. Now, Tosfos here asks a great question. If we take a look at the second Tosfos, Meshaber b'yotze, now, earlier we said that you had to pull out the bottom ox. So why don't we say that you need to pile up the barrels? So hainu mishum deleka tircha b'shmita yoter midechifa. That in that situation, the pulling of the bottom ox is no greater work than the pushing of the upper ox. We're just asking you to choose the least damaging method that you need to choose one of. But here, if when it comes to the barrels in your the jugs that are in your yard, so here aval hacha lo atarchuhu l'sadran zalzel. We're not going to force you to pile them up. We're not going to make you do extra work. Now, if the same amount of work is done to break them as to just move them out of the way, then we will say that you're liable for having broken them. So you need to be ready for that possibility of being charged with that. But all right, but that's the question. The question is we seem to be allowing people to break the jugs, even though that would be effectively taking the law into your own hands. So Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak Meshaber b'yotze lebeis din Meshaber b'nichnas lahavis chuyosav. That no, you're reading this too literally. We don't mean that you're allowed to break it and exit. You're allowed to break it and enter. We mean that when you break and exit, it means going to court, and when you break and enter, it means bringing your proofs into court. So it does not, in fact, it should not, in fact, be interpreted literally, and as a result, you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands. Okay, Tashma. Case number 4, effort number 4. Minayan lenirtza shikalu lo yamav. We have a brisa that says that how do you know that somebody who had their ear pierced? So again, a reminder of what the situation is. It's a slave, exactly, a Jewish slave who has decided to stay with his master after 6 years of slavery. He wants to continue. And so he's going to get his ear pierced. And now he's going to stay a slave until the Yovel of that particular Yovel cycle. And so now Yovel has come, and now the question is that person, V'Rabba Misarhev Bo, let's say, and his owner was pushing him out to get him out to leave. And then in doing so, he ended up wounding the slave. Of course, the slave is now no longer a slave, so he should be liable for that damage. Shehu patur. Nonetheless, when the master is just trying to get the guy out of his house because he's no longer a slave, then he is not liable. How do I know that? Talmud Lomar, lo tiku kofer lashuv. We don't collect a payment. Lashuv is the end of the pasuk, which says that we don't collect a payment, or later part of the pasuk, when the object is returning. So what does that mean? Lo tiku kofer lashab, that the one who is returning does not get a payment. Two ways of understanding lashab Rashi offers. One is that we're talking about the person is trying to return to continue his slavery, or we're talking about the person who's supposed to be returning to his family outside the context of slavery, and he refuses. So in any event, but the point is that we see here that the person's allowed to push the guy out, and if he does damage, then he is not going to be liable. Well, talk about my askinan, but of the ganava. No, the reason that we're saying that this is permitted is because there would be a loss, because we're not just talking about any slave, we're talking about a slave who's going to steal from you if you allow him to stay in your house, and so that's why the guy's getting him out. Well, 1 second, ad ha'idna lo ganav, but wouldn't you have been worried about him stealing before now? And there's a principle that you're allowed to kick out a slave who is stealing from you. So as a result, and decide that you don't want him any longer. V'hashta ganav. And so how is he going to steal? So the point is, ad ha'idna haba say the rabbi alei, but well, no, there's a big difference, because the reason that we're worried about him stealing now is because before now he was worried about his master, because his master can engage in corporal punishment because it's his master, or at least just in general that he was afraid of getting his master upset of the consequences. But hashta leisle aimsa the rabbi. But now that he's no longer a slave, he isn't afraid of his master any longer. So that's answer number one. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak offers a different answer. Be'evet shemaser lo rabo shevcha kananis. Well, we could also be talking about where the slave was given by his master a shevcha kananis, a non-Jewish maidservant, because a Jewish slave is allowed to be married to a non-Jewish maidservant, but only during the time that they are a Jewish slave. So now that he has exhausted his entire time as a Jewish slave, he needs to leave her, but he doesn't want to leave her. But he's required to leave her because he's not allowed to continue to be with her. So ad ha'idna hetera, until now it was all permitted for him to be with her. But habahashta isura, now it's prohibited, and Rashi explains Isura v'rashai halkoto, and so as a result, you can hit him lahafrishot in order to separate him. Dahaidina lav lenafshehu. Now the master is not in fact acting on his own behalf. He's not trying to enforce the law for himself. He's trying to enforce the law for the person to behave according to Torah law. And when you act in order to enforce the behavior according to Torah law, as long as you're not acting for yourself, that's allowed, as Rashi would understand it. So that's the fourth effort, and again, the fourth effort has failed as well. Okay, so that brings us to the fifth effort. And Tashma Hamaniach Hakad Rishus Harabim, put your jug down in Rishus Harabim Muva'achar V'Niskalba Ushvara. This is actually our Mishnah, and now somebody else has come and tripped on it and broken it. Putter. He's not liable for having broken it. Why? Time of presumably it's the reason that he's not liable for breaking it is because he tripped on it. Hashvara chayev. But if he had broken it on purpose, even though he had a legitimate right to break it, because after all, he had a legitimate right to break it because it wasn't where it was supposed to be. You put it in the public thoroughfare, but it's not supposed to be in the public thoroughfare. So as a result, I have the right to break it. So, but yeah, we say that you're chayiv. So doesn't that show you don't have the right to take the law into your own hands? So Amar Zvid Mishmei de Rava. No, huadin afilu shvara. Really, even if you broke it on purpose, you won't be liable. And as we saw this logic earlier in the very beginning of the Gemara on our most recent Mishnah, that the reason that we talk about tripping over it, that's because of the latter part of the Mishnah. Because what did we say in the end of the Mishnah? That if in fact the person who was walking and tripped on it got damaged by the pitcher, by the broken shards, or fell because of the water inside it, then the owner of the pitcher is going to be liable for the damage. Davka nisko. That only applies if the person tripped, because aval shavar low. But if the person broke it on purpose, that would not be the case. Dehu azik nanafshe, because he effectively hurt himself. So katani reisha nisko. So because the end of the Mishnah only applies with respect to tripping, we also use tripping as the case to talk about in the beginning of the Mishnah. So we've made 5 attempts and we've still been unsuccessful. So we try number 6. Tashma v'katsosa as kapa, that when it comes to a woman who sees her husband fighting with somebody and she goes and grabs the private parts of the man who's fighting her husband, mamon. Even though it says that you should cut off her hand, this is a pasuk in Dvarim Kavhei pasuk Yubet. We say that does not mean literally, but rather you pay money. Now, I might have thought that this only applies where she's unable to save her husband in another way. And so as a result, this shows that even when she's unable to save her husband in another way, meaning even if she can't save her husband in another way, she will be liable for the damage she does because she is not allowed to take the law into her own hands. So, lo, no, when we say that she is going to be liable for monetary damages for embarrassing the guy because she grabbed him in the private parts, so that's because there was another way that she could have acted that wouldn't have embarrassed the attacker and would have stopped him. But if there was no way otherwise to stop her, well, then Petura, she would not be liable. So as a result, this is not, in fact, a counter to our example of does not show that you cannot take the law into your own hands, but rather is consistent. It's consistent, as we've said, as the Ramah highlighted in the halacha. It's consistent, but you have to do it in the least damaging way possible. Well, what about the end of that brisa? Because the end of the brisa says, "Vishalcha yada prat l'shliach beistin," that when we say that she sends out her hand, it means that the wife is the only one who will be liable. But if you have an agent of court, then he would not be liable. So lifleg lisne bedida. Why are you telling me something, a law about the agent in court, to tell me that the agent of court is not liable? You could have just switched the case and said at the end of that brisa that if she had no other mechanism, then she would not be liable. But medvar amurim, right? Because what could we said that when is she liable? We could have just had the end of the brisa say that when is she liable? She's liable when she has no other choice of how to save her husband. I'm sorry, when she has other options as to how to save her husband. But if she has no other methods, well, then she will not be liable. So why didn't we just teach that at the end of the brisa? And that would help highlight, right? The whole point of this brisa is the beginning point. Beginning part shows that she's liable, and the end part shows somebody not liable. Why talk about the agent of the court when we could show there's a way that she herself would not be liable? So the answer is hachinami kamar. No, you're misreading and misunderstanding the point of the brisa. The brisa is actually teaching us 2 points. It's teaching us b'medvar mamurim. When is it true that the woman herself is going to be liable? It's when she could have saved her husband through other efforts. That wouldn't have caused the embarrassment. But when she cannot save him through other efforts, well then, she herself becomes like an agent of the court, upatura, and as a result, she's exempt. So the point is that in fact, that's exactly right. So in fact, the brisa is telling us that if there's no other means, she's like the agent of Beit Din and not liable. Okay, effort number 7. So again, we keep trying to see whether the halakha is like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rav Yehuda or Rav Nachman, and we have not been successful in proving it one way or the other, and we try some number 7. Tashma hareisha hayisad derech harabim overes besoch sadeu. If you've got somebody who has a public thoroughfare going in the middle of their field, and instead he tries to change that thoroughfare and give them an edge of the field. Obviously, it's a much bigger pain for the guy if you have a path right in the middle of your field that is taken over by the public. It would be much better to put it on one of the sides. So masha nasan b'shalo lo higio. Well, what happens is that what he gave to the public, meaning the side thoroughfare, is now belongs to the public, and he hasn't gotten back his original land. So he's doubly cursed, so to speak. Now, the amrat avid inish dina l'navshe linkod pisra v'leitiv. Why not, if a person can sit and enforce the law for himself, let him just sit and take a stick and prevent anybody who wants to go to the original path. So doesn't that show that you cannot take the law into your own hands? So Amarav Zvid Mishmei de Rabba Gzeira Shema Yitain Lahem Derech Aklaton. No, we're going to give 3 answers to this. Answer number 1 is that there's a rabbinic decree that prohibits this because we're worried that somebody's going to give a crooked path to the public, that he's not going to give as nice a path as the original one. Rav Masharshia Amar, no, benozing lehem derech haklaton. The case that we're talking about is specifically where you gave him a crooked path. And Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi says, no, kol min atzad derech haklaton hu. No, the point is that any time you give a side path, you are hurting somebody because krova lezeh or rochoka lezeh. Because for somebody, that new path is going to be less advantageous. So by definition, Rav Ashi says, you're going to be providing a less advantageous path to somebody, and you can't make a change that will hurt somebody. So ihachi amai shalolo hikio. Well, 1 second. Why does he not, why not let him keep his original one? Lemalahu shakulo didchu v'habuli didi. Meaning, look, at least let me take back my path that I had that I was giving you on the side. Why doesn't he get to do that? So Mishum de Rav Yehuda, de Amr Rav Yehuda, Meitzer shechaziku bo rabim aser lekalkalo. Once any aspect of the boundary has become part of the public thoroughfare, there's nothing you can do about it. So the point is that he's stuck because the public took possession of the side path. If he acted before the side path, if he says, if he were to come to me and tell me, listen, this is what I'm planning to do. I'm planning to block up the middle path that the public was using and give them something on the side. I'd be able to tell him, don't do that, because if you do that, then they're going to get both of them. And so if he does it before they actually take possession, well, then he will be able to take it back. But once they take possession, it's too late, and they end up with two paths through his yard. Okay, so that was effort number 7. Final effort, Tashma, Balabayas Sheiniach Peyad Mitzad Echad, Uvo Aniyam Minat Mitzad Acher. So a person figures, listen, I'm going to give the corner of my field to the poor people, but I want it to be the northeast corner. Well, it turns out that the poor people came and started collecting from the southwest corner. Zeb is Peya. The poor people came from another side. So Zeb is Peya. Both corners end up being Peya. Now, the way we understand this at the moment is that both corners effectively belong to the poor people. So why is that? If a person can enforce the law for themselves, why should both of them be considered for the poor? Linko Pizra Velativ. Let him take the stick and sit in the corner and beat away anybody who tries to take the stuff that isn't supposed to be for the poor people. So Amarava, no, my Zev is at Peya. When we say that both corners end up being treated like Peya, it does not actually mean that both corners go to the poor people, but rather Lepotra Minamaser. It's to tell you that when you make something Peya, it becomes exempt from Trumas and Meiser. And so as a result, you do not have to take off Meiser from it. So Kedetanya, and this is consistent with the following brisa. Hamafkir is Karmo, if you make your field ownerless, Hishkin Baboker Bitsaro, and yet you then get up in the morning and you harvest it, Chaya Beferet Uva Olot, Uva Shicha, Uva Peya. You still have to do all of the different kinds of gifts for the poor. And they are, right? So the gifts are peret, that's grapes that fall. That's what we also referred to as leket. Then shechacha, which uses the same name for grapes as for other things, other produce, where we say that if you forgot a small part of your field to collect, that goes to the poor. And then peya, and that's and then ololot is something that's undeveloped, meaning if it doesn't actually develop into a nice cluster of grapes, so that also goes to the poor. Shechacha, we just explained, peya is the corner, and so all 4 of those obligations remain, even though you made it ownerless. You made your field ownerless, but now that you're still the one who's collecting, we're not going to let you out of obligations to the poor so easily. However, upater min hamaser, but you are exempt from meiser. You do not have to pay the tithes that are associated with the field, and that's because it isn't your field any longer. So similarly, when you say that you're going to make one corner peya, and then the poor people take from another corner, so then those 2 corners are have at some point effectively become not your field. And even though you're now taking back the corner that you had originally set aside for the poor, but the poor were taking from a different corner, so that's the corner that they're going to get. And now you get to claim back this original corner that you had set aside for the poor. That corner will not be subject to the obligations of Meiser. And that is what the Brisa is telling us when we say Zeb Peya. Okay, so we've tried 8 different times, and we've been unsuccessful. And as I said, the halacha actually follows Rav Nachman, that in fact we say you can collect, and as highlighted by Stan, you can do so only if you do it in the least damaging way possible. So now we go.
One thing about the last case about Peah being exempt from Meiser, a simple reason or explanation why Peah is exempt from Meiser is that the obligation for Peah takes effect before the obligation for Truma or Meiser. So anything that's declared to be Peah, and you're supposed to do it right at the beginning of the harvest, you can't take Truma or Meiser from it yet.
That certainly, that is absolutely right. But the point is that this is saying that even when you now go back to that corner that you had set, so that's again the northeast corner was the one I thought I was going to have as Peah, but then everybody took it from the southwest corner. But now I'm going to reap and collect all of the things that are in the northeast corner, even after I take it, and even after I bring it into my threshing floor, and so and pile it up. So as a result, it ordinarily would be a time that it would be obligated in Meiser. It still won't be obligated in Meiser because I effectively had given up rights to it, and so as a result, it's like I'm collecting it from ownerless property and not from my own property, and therefore, even still, I'm not going to be obligated in Meiser. So, so thank you for allowing me to clarify that. And again, I said that Stan highlighted it, but it was you, Charlie, that made the point to begin with, that the Ramah makes the point that it was not, that you're not allowed to do it in a manner that is more damaging than otherwise possible. Okay, so now we're going to get, so this was taking the law into our own hands. We go back to the topic of the general topic of this perek, which is the obligation, the liability associated with dangerous items in the public domain. So, which are under the category generally of bore. So, nishbara kado b'rishos harabim. If your jug broke in Rishos Harabim, v'huchlak echad b'mayim, and now somebody slipped on the water, o shalaka b'charsis, or was injured by a piece of the pottery, chayev. The owner of the pitcher is liable. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, b'miskaven chayev. You're chayev with intent. Be'eno miskaven, but if you don't have intent, putter, then you're not. So what in the world does that mean with intent? That is going to be our first topic for tomorrow, so you'll have to stay tuned for that. I will remind you of that as we close, but let's take a look at the first discussion here. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Lo Shanu Elisha Tinfu Kela B'mayim. So what's the story? What's the case that the person is going to be subject to liability? Are we talking about the injury to the person himself or an injury to his property? So Rav says that we're talking about an injury to his property, that it's talking about his clothing got dirty as a result of his trip. Aval hu atzmo, but if he himself were to get damaged, putter, he would be not liable, because karka olam izikato. It was just the land, the ground that damaged him. And so as a result, he would not in fact be liable. So Amrita Kamei de Shmuel, when this was told in front of Shmuel, Amrali, he told me, Mikti, let's take a look. Avno v'sakinu maso biboro lamanu. All of these public damaging things we've learned from the category of bore. A stone, a knife, a load, all of them are learned from bore. The kulan ani kora behen, and all of them we have and we'll see in a moment, a brisa that teaches the following concept. Shor below Adam, that when we have liability for damage caused by a pit, it's referring to damage to an animal like an ox, but not to a person. Chamor, an animal like a donkey, but not to lola kelim, not to the utensils that are on the donkey. V'hani mili le'inyan katola. Now all of this applies with respect to somebody who falls and dies. Aval inyan nezikin adam chayav v'kelim peturim. you'll be liable for a person, but not for utensils. So the Rav. So now, if that's true, so how does Rav understand this? Because we just noted that you'd be liable for the clothing that got dirty, but clothing is a kind of utensil. And so we just said that you're not obligated for damage to utensils when it falls into a pit. So why did Rav just say that we were liable in our Mishnah? So V'Rav, Hani Mili Hecha Da'af Kirinhu. What you explained, Shmuel, Rav says that is only true if the person who owned the pitcher and the water that was in the pitcher made it all ownerless. But if he doesn't make it ownerless, mamonahu, it's still considered his money, and as a result, it's part of the category of shore, and therefore he would be liable. And so, therefore, we have a very big distinction between Rav and Shmuel. We saw this at the very beginning of our Maseches, and here is the main location of the machlokas. Rav says that when it comes to a pit, if the person, a pit-like object, meaning if I put a load or a knife or something in the public thoroughfare and it still belongs to me, I'm going to be liable as a result of my ownership of the object, not based on the concept of a pit. On the other hand, Shmuel says it doesn't make a difference whether you still own it. Once you put something that causes damage in the public, we're going to treat it like a bore, and it's going to be subject to the laws of bore. And the main difference between those two opinions is that if I still own it, and now my object somehow does damage to your non-animal property, am I going to be liable? According to Rav, if I still own the object, yes. And according to Shmuel, even if I still own the object, I'm not going to be liable because it still falls under the category of bore. So now we're going to challenge this. And Masiv Rav Oshia, V'nafal Shama Shor O Chamor. We have a problem. And this brisa is going to be a problem according to both Rav and Shmuel. And in fact, of course, because it's going to be a problem to both of them, we'll see that it's actually an internally inconsistent brisa. If an animal falls into the pit, so shor below Adam, chamor below Kalim. This was the brisa that I mentioned that we quoted indirectly a few moments ago. That an ox tells us that you're not obligated for the death of a person, and a donkey tells us you're not obligated to pay in connection with utensils. Mikan Amru, from here we learn Naval Atoko Shor Kalav Vinishtabru. If an ox falls with its utensils into a pit and the utensils break, Chamor v'kelav v'niskaru, or a donkey and its utensils and the utensils tear, Chayav ala behema, you're going to be liable. The owner of the pit is going to be liable for the animal, upater al kalim, but you're not liable for the utensils. And what is this comparable to? It's just like a stone knife or burden or load that you put in the public domain and it causes damage. Now, 1 second, you are just comparing the pit to a stone knife and load, but that and a package, but that seems odd because that seems to suggest that we're learning pit from stone, knife, and package, but we actually learn it the other way around. Stone, knife, and package are subcategories of pit. So Adarab, the Gemara points, Ma domel excuse me, Ma domel mi baile. You should have said what is comparable to a pit, not to what is a pit comparable. Meaning, not where do we learn out pit, but what do we learn from pit to? And so Ella, so the Gemara just now rereads it. My domelizet. Yes, all right, you're right. We should be saying what is a pit comparable? What is comparable to a pit? And we say it's like a stone, knife, or package that was put in the public domain and causes damage. So as a result, and this is where we now have the inconsistency, if you have a flask that breaks against the stone, chayiv, the owner of the stone is going to be liable. Whoa! Reisha kashel Rav, the seifa kashel Shmuel. We got a big problem because the beginning part of this brisa has a problem according to Rav, because according to Rav, an object put in the public domain is considered a pit even when it wasn't made ownerless, right? We said that there was no liability for kalim, and we didn't talk about whether or not the object was made ownerless. And then the end of this brisa is going to be problem for Shmuel, because we just said that the owner of the rock is going to be liable for the flask, that for the glass that was broken against it. So why is the owner liable for the glass? That glass is a utensil. So why should there be liability? So 1 second, the Gemara points out, there's a bigger issue here. The whole brisa is problematic because Reisha Pater v'Seifa Chayev. You have liability for kalim, no liability for kalim in the beginning, and you have liability for kalim in the end. So which is it? Ella, Rav Mutar Zotame, Shmuel Tamatar Zotame. They can each explain this brisa according to their own logic. And how does it go? That when we said that there's going to be no liability in the beginning of our Mishnah, that is because you made the item ownerless. But if you did not make the item ownerless, well then chayav, that's going to be chayav as the and therefore, if you actually have your flask against the stone, and that stone is still owned by the person who owned the stone to begin with, then that person is going to be liable according to Rav. And Shmuel will also explain this brisa according to his reasoning. And he's going to say the beginning part of our brisa is exactly right. That now that we've compared a stone, knife, and burden, that is true. Rabbi Yehuda, but however, we have to highlight that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and it's Rabbi Yehuda who disagrees and says that you are liable for utensils, damage to utensils. So it's specifically Rabbi Yehuda who would be the author of the last statement of that brisa. And so, according to Shmuel, the Tana Kamma of the brisa, that in fact there's a machlokus in this brisa, and the Tana Kamma is exactly like Shmuel says, and Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the last part because he disagrees and says that there is liability even for utensils. So Amar Rabbi Lazar lo shanu ela sheniskal be'evan v'nishov be'evan. That when we talked about that last case, now we're going to have two different versions of this Gemara, but that when we talked about this last case of the person breaking the flask against the stone, we're talking about only where the person tripped on the stone and broke the glass against the stone. But if in fact he had stumbled over the ground, he just tripped on his own, then putter, then the stone person's not going to be liable. Because, Kamma, who is this like? Delok Rabbi Natan. It's essentially not like Rabbi Natan. And Rashi here helps us who's Rabbi Natan. If we take a look, Rashi 7 lines up, Delok Rabbi Natan. The Amr Lakaman, Rabbi Natan is the one who says, coming up on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph on 53a, B'shur Shedachav Eskabeiro Labor, that if you have one ox pushing another into a pit, so now both the owner of the pit and the owner of the pushing ox are going to be liable. So kol hecha delekla ashtalume mehai shor mishtalem mibor, and we say that anything that cannot be collected from the owner of the from the pushing ox, that can be collected from the owner of the pit. So hide the avid lay hezika, because the pit did the damage also. So the point is that according to Rabbi Natan, you would be allowed to collect from the owner of the stone, because even though it was just the ground that caused the fall, at the end of the day, the stone caused the damage to the flask, to the glass. And so as a result, that's going to be, so according to Rabbi Natan, there would be liability. And so according to according to our first language of Rabbi Lazar, who says that there is no liability if you stumble on the ground and you break your flask against the stone, that's because he doesn't hold a Rabbi Natan. But there are others who say that we can read the Gemara the following way. Rabbi Lazar should say the following: Lo tema beniskal be'evan v'nishov be'evan hut mechayev. that it's not only when you trip on the ground and you break the glass against a stone. I'm sorry, it's not only where you trip on the stone and you break the glass against the stone that you will be liable. About niska b'karka v'nisha be'eben patur, but when you trip on the ground and you break the glass against the stone, you're not liable. Ella, rather, it's not that. Ella afilu niska b'karka v'nisha be'eben chayav. Even if you trip on the ground and you break the glass against the stone, you're going to be liable. And Kamma, who is that like? Rebbe Natan. So we'll pick up with the 2 dots, God willing, at the near the bottom of Kuchet on a bet tomorrow. And again, tomorrow we'll begin with the key important question. What in the world did Rebbe Yehuda mean when he said that the owner of a broken pitcher needed to have intent in order to be liable? So for the answer to this question, stay tuned to tomorrow's daf. We'll have more. We'll talk about Rebbe Yehuda. That's who we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Tomorrow is a new month of December. Yes, that is a new month. Have a wonderful day, everybody.